Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show with your host, Andrew Jenkins. On the show, we'll be exploring the world of entrepreneurship, social media, and the growing digital landscape. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, you know that the world of business is constantly evolving and changing. And in today's digital age, it is more important than ever to understand how social media and technology are affecting the way we do business. That's why on this show, we'll be talking to entrepreneurs and experts who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you. From the latest trends and technologies to the struggles and triumphs of running a business, we'll be covering it all. So if you're looking to level up your entrepreneurial game and become more digitally savvy, then let's get started with the Low Production, High Value Show.
Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show. On today's episode, we are talking with Jaime Proctor Boyce. Welcome.
Hi.
So, to set the context, you run an organization called Pocketed, and full transparency, I had the fantastic benefit of using your services, which benefited my company, from the standpoint of, I will call it grants or wage subsidies, but that's my experience. So to kind of as a point of jumping off here, tell us a little bit about what Pocketed is and what Pocketed does for entrepreneurs and small business.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Andrew. I'm so glad to hear that Pocketed was of help. I'm Jaime. I'm the director of growth at Pocketed, which is actually founded by two amazing women, Brianna Blaney and Dr. Aria Hahn, a business and a technical co-founder, who started this company with the goal of eliminating financial barriers for entrepreneurs. And the way we're starting to do that is by helping folks with grants, tax credits, in some cases, government debt, but non-dilutive funding solutions. So there's a lot of money out there. We know in Canada, I think it's close to $6 billion is given back to entrepreneurs from the Canadian government in the form of these various incentives. But they're really confusing. And so all the programs are decentralized. You might be getting money from one program, and then there's another program with a different name, but it's actually the same funding, but like the requirements are slightly different. So just one example. There are thousands and thousands of programs. And so what Aria and Brianna decided to do was, well, really, they realized that grants were both a really positive part of the various businesses they had started because they're both serial entrepreneurs, and grants were also a hard part of what they had been building. And so they started chatting with other entrepreneurs about grants and tax credits. Again, same pain points. Things are decentralized, they're opaque, they're constantly changing, and they started to build Pocketed. So we offer both software and services that help folks connect with, identify the funding programs that could be a benefit to their businesses. We help folks build strategy around funding because a lot of these programs aren't immediately available, or there does need to be a roadmap. And then we also help folks with actual grant writing execution. We help write applications when allowed, to help them get the money in their bank accounts.
When you talk about the strategy for this, do you mean how to position the organization, and if there's, shall we say, some hurdles or some steps that or criteria that have to be met? Do you help with that approach? One, so that from their point of view, perhaps it's repeatable. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's many stages in what you're talking about. So I think there's something about making sure organizations are ready to pursue funding. We absolutely help with that in terms of acting as consultants and advisors. And then there's also the piece of strategically positioning your project or your business to meet a funder's mandate. So if I back it up a little bit, when we talk about strategy, again, there's thousands of programs in our database in the Canadian funding ecosystem. And so it's at our core, what our software does is it intelligently matches a business to the programs that are relevant to them. So instead of having to sift through thousands and thousands, maybe you're going to see 80 or 150. But the reality is that's still sometimes overwhelming. So that's still a lot. And so the first part of the strategy is then how do we winnow down from that 150 programs to literally the three, four, five, or six maybe that you're going to pursue in a single year. Even that would be a lot, right? And so that is the funding strategy roadmap. But in order to get to those five or six programs, you might need to, I don't know, hit a certain revenue threshold or be in partnership with another organization or have a certain type of business structure. If it's a hiring grant like you leveraged, Andrew, you might need to make sure you've got your payroll deductions account set up with the CRA. So there's all of these little pieces of organizational readiness that we're happy to advise people on. But then the other strategic positioning is absolutely coming to bear in the grant writing. So we talk a lot at Pocketed about how grants don't necessarily fund businesses. Now, of course, they do. They're going to give your business some money, but when deciding to fund to fund a business or not, really, we're looking at the project. We're looking at what are you doing? What business activities are you doing within the scope of your organization that dovetail with the funder's mandate? So, if we take hiring grants, for example, the project is often the job description. It's the role that you're creating for a student or a youth or someone returning to the job force. And so you know that if you maybe want to hire a digital marketing student, that you're going to go look for the funders that want to help create digital marketing jobs. You're not going to go to Eco Canada that cares about green jobs and sustainability jobs, right? So that's a really basic example of how do we strategically position your project or your job description with the right funder and then speak to those funders' concerns when you're putting forth your proposal. It gets a lot more complex the bigger the grants, the larger the dollar value. But that's an example of how we're helping folks connect with the right funders and put forward the right projects.
Does that speak to then the grant or the granting organization? Are they looking for? I mean, it seems logical that they're looking for some net benefit, not necessarily for themselves, but for the recipient of the grant, not the business recipient of the grant, but what the beneficiary of the grant being facilitated. That could be external to the organization that takes the grant and then does something with it from a project point of view. Is it looking at, I'll call it under that umbrella of net benefit, but as well as kind of values alignment?
Absolutely. We talk a lot about mandate. We talk a lot about what's the benefit to Canada, right? It's not just the benefit to your business or even to the individual employee maybe who's going to, help you leverage a wage subsidy. It's how are we making Canada more inclusive? How are we making it more prosperous? How are we making it more digital, more innovative, more focused on a certain sector? There are all of these, initiatives and priorities or values that we collectively have, and those are manifested in, the government priorities. And so we always want to be thinking when we're writing a grant or researching a program, how is what I'm doing helping move the needle on this funder's mandate? So when we think about hiring grants, they exist because we need to create jobs. We particularly need to create jobs for folks that have been historically underrepresented in the workforce, whether it's an Indigenous person or someone living in a rural community. But we also want to create jobs for young people to make sure that our future workforce is competitive and has real on the job training. When we look at, there's a whole suite of programs that just got rolled out last year called CDAP, or the Canadian Digital Adoption Program. And those are all aimed at helping businesses digitize. And from my point of view, that's because we all unfortunately lived through that lockdown. I mean, unfortunately, it helped a lot of us. But it was also hard, right? It was really hard on business. And so, God forbid we ever have to go through another period of lockdown like that. Wouldn't it be great if more businesses were prepared to keep their doors open because they have done digitization projects? Um, So there's money out there to advance that mandate. We know that the more money countries invest in innovation, the better their GDP is. And so there's a lot of money out there to invest in software development and hardware development and innovation in agriculture or energy, because again, it's a shared um, a shared priority between the private sector and our government.
Well, and a lot of organizations went through a digital transformation, whether they wanted to or not, and even if they had it planned, it happened a lot faster than they originally thought it was going to be. So, um, with what you're describing, though, um, there's more programs coming out and things like that. I guess from an advice to someone interested in finding funding opportunities is to be careful that you don't look opportunistic, selfish, or like, oh look, free money. It's not that simple. Like it is about like the grants and the mandate behind them are designed in certain ways that again alignment in values, benefit, net benefit, and there could be a number of stakeholders that are to be the beneficiaries. Is that
Yeah,
fair
for
to say?
sure, for sure. And I also don't want to intimidate people, because, like, at the end of the day, some of these programs are really straightforward. It's one form, it's submitting some receipts. But there is a nice check and balance with these programs where you do have to show like proof of the progress that you've made with your project, whether that's the pay stub that issued to pay your student intern, whether it's a report on the metrics of what you said you're going to deliver. Um, the reality is that some of the programs can be relatively easy to access, but you are going to have to show what you've done. And also, in large part, grants are going to be issued as reimbursements. So, just like in any business transaction, there's risk involved. And one of the ways that the government mitigates that risk is it's rare that they give you money upfront or rare that they give you much money upfront. Rather, you're going to need to pay for your project. So, you're going to need to pay your student intern. The nice thing about grants is that funding is very reliable, right? You might get it as a reimbursement, but once you do have that funding contract with the government and they say, go forth, hire your student intern for that digital marketing role, you can be very assured that you are going to receive that money eventually.
The well, one of the reasons that your organization exists and that I leveraged your services was frankly I hate paperwork, and but to your point that people, even though you do expedite some of the process, there is still a lot of onus on the organization pursuing funding because just as you described, in order to be awarded a grant and then even post that, like, so yes, we hired someone as a summer intern, the documentation that had to be provided. So if you, I warn listeners and viewers, if you are not prepared to keep things on file or have the mechanisms in place for accumulating all the necessary documentation, yeah, it's going to, you're not going to enjoy yourself.
Totally. And I think there's 2 points in there though that that's really why we built Pocketed. It's confusing. There's pieces to keep track of. So our software, it does a great job of helping with a lot of that, whether it's helping with just identifying the right program for you or tracking your application in our application tracker, which is a feature in our software. Whether it's an application automation tool, which we have, it will start to auto populate documents for you with saved information. How many times have I looked up what date Pocketed was incorporated? Well, now with the application automation tool, that's stored. And it's going to auto populate every time. So there's definitely pain points that we have experienced firsthand. So at this point, Pocketed as an organization ourselves, we've leveraged close to 750 million, that would be amazing, million, $750,000, close to $1 million in grants. We haven't always been able to utilize it, which is a point we can come back to. But we have ourselves accessed a lot of money, and we've definitely experienced the pain point you're talking about. And actively developing software solutions to help fix them. Um, the other thing though is that when you do it once you do it once, it's a lot easier to do it a second time. And that's fine. Maybe you don't, that's not a skill set that you want to add to your repertoire as an entrepreneur. That's another reason Pocketed exists. There's lots of people who like writing grants, who like reporting on grants. They are happy to be your organized operations person for you. But as our CEO Brianna always says, like really the biggest obstacle to getting a grant is the fact that no one starts the grant application. So doing it once and going through that pain is going to pay dividends in the long run.
Yeah, the first time always takes longer for anything. But even like I remember taking my kids to a presentation about scholarships and things like that, and they talked about how many different options there are, and it's not just about grades. I even was doing a postgraduate program, and someone mentioned that there was a bursary about it, and I thought, oh, what the heck? I applied and I got it because no one ever applied for it because they were all grown ups and thought, well, that's for the kids to apply. Like, no, no, this program is for grown ups and there's a bursary for it. So I applied and got half of my tuition paid for.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, training grants are, I have the sense, um, I don't know if they're hugely underutilized, but I feel like the world is hugely unaware of them. So there's a federal transfer from the government of Canada of money to the provinces to help keep the local workforce competitive. So how do we do that? With training and upskilling. So in most provinces, you can get up to $10,000 every year for your employees. And in some provinces, you can get it for up to 30 employees. That's like $300,000 in training costs. So, the next time, really, if anyone is listening is an employee, like if there's some training that you want to get, go research the provincial training grant that's available to you as an employee. Or if you're an entrepreneur, and know that you could be getting more out of your team if they had some whatever leadership training, marketing training, the sky's the limit. These are programs that are out there, and literally, again, like government and private sector sharing in keeping our workforce competitive. I mean, it can really pay huge dividends to an employer to offset training costs, which also in this world, at this time when it can be competitive to find the right person, what a huge boon if you're able to offer a learning and development stipend to new hires, but you can get it grant funded.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization with this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins. Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or koganpage.com.
Well, the course that I teach at the University of Toronto, I get students, and this is a postgraduate certificate program, so that all of my students are working professionals, but they could be, you know, 1, 2, 3 years out of school, so early in their career, mid-career, and late in their career, and they're taking them for different reasons to enter the workforce more competitive, to stay competitive, or if you're later in the career, to manage people that are more familiar with the subject matter than you are, and so you're getting up to speed, so that you're on the same page as those that you're leading and managing. But I don't know if their employers are leveraging grants or they're just it's a stipend. But thank you for raising that or flagging that.
Yes, in,
Part
in Ontario, it's called the Ontario Canada Job Grant. So maybe that's another reason is that it's called a job grant, but it's not a wage subsidy. It's a training grant. So anyway,
my own work through my company, we've done sessions around digital and social under those types of grants, um, to again help the digital transformation of organizations. Uh, One of the questions I wanted to ask you was, are there more prevalent industries or categories, or maybe job type that, where the larger portions of grants are? Or like, I know you mentioned like the ecological oriented grants, but of the billions that you described earlier, are they allocated disproportionately in some? I also forgot that. Are there, different regions more funded than others?
Yeah, great question. So to start, it's probably helpful to share that at Pocketed, we tend to talk about a handful of grant categories. The first definitely being hiring. So these are wage subsidies and stipends to help bring people onto your team. Largely, it will be required that you're adding someone on payroll. So again, the government's mandate is job creation. How do they measure that? You're adding somebody that pays into CPP and EI. So you're putting them on payroll. Training grants that we just talked about. Other categories of grants would be R&D, so research and development. I would say that that category can tend to favor technology-focused companies, but across all industries.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with
Whether
that with some of the startups I worked for.
Yeah, absolutely. So agriculture, clean tech, software and hardware development, you know, it really can be all kinds of things, but that category really does want to see you building technology and that technology advancing through the different technology readiness levels.
Lots of documentation is required for that too, because they want to know hours. There's a lot of documentation involved for shred credit because they want to see how many hours, resources applied. Yeah,
Yeah, so Andrew's talking about shred credits, which when we talk about there being $6 billion, $5.9 billion of government funding in Canada every year. Half of that comes from a single program that is not actually a grant, but it is a tax refund called the Scientific Research and Experimental Development Credit. But I'm just out of a consult with a client who is actually building sort of psychologically informed technology. Anyway, all to say that like I just saw this afternoon that psychological research can be included in shred. So I've never worked with a client that's claimed it for those types of projects. So I'm going to go learn about that. But we have had lots of clients building software, building hardware. And it's an awesome program. It's not a refund against like, you don't have to be profitable to claim it. And it gives you a lot of money back on what you pay out to employees and contractors working on technology development. But there are also tons of other R&D grants too. Um, Market expansion is another really common example, and that can be expansion from one province into another, or more commonly, expansion outside of Canada. So that's a hot program right now. We're chatting in February, March
does that
2023.
tend to be for more of a product, a
And
manufacturing?
no, it can be services as well. So, a big program right now that's just reopened for the year is called the Can Export Program. And that is up to $50,000 in their SME stream, their small to medium sized enterprise stream, to bring your product or service into a new market. So it could be the United States, it could be India, it could be parts of Africa, it could be Australia. But yeah, I have IT services, design services, marketing services. Folks that are exporting those services to clients in new countries would totally be eligible for that grant. That specific program does require a $100,000 revenue threshold. So that is an example. Um, Definitely your funding opportunities are going to grow with you as your business grows. So at Pocketed, we love hiring grants. They're a great on ramp to funding. You do typically need to be a registered business, but there's not typically a requirement around revenue. I mean, these hiring programs are often leveraged by pre-revenue companies who just need to add subsidized folks to their team. Um, but again, the more advanced your technology is, the more your revenue is. Being incorporated for 2 years can be a common requirement for larger programs. So again, there is money when you're just starting out, but it's going to be smaller amounts and it's going to be in fewer categories. And then at the provincial level, when you ask, there's definitely, I would say, different funding opportunities depending where you are. I'm based in Nova Scotia, and so for us, oceans are a huge focus, ocean technology. So there's lots of programs, but just like many other provinces in Canada, immigration is a huge focus. So there's lots of stimulus if you're helping newcomers connect with projects and meaningful employment. So definitely that's something, the different provincial variations are something we're really familiar with here at Pocketed. Our company was founded in BC, but again, I'm in Nova Scotia, and there's folks across the country and grant writers and grant specialists that are very familiar with various different, regional ecosystems of funding.
Would you recommend then, because you talked about various stages from startup or like pre-revenue, not perhaps not even incorporated kind of thing, that um, people are more and their organizations make a habit of either when I say check in with you is just to stay like attuned to because there's new stuff every year or even more
Oh yeah,
frequently.
every couple weeks sometimes. Absolutely. Yeah. So again, when we're talking about funding, I really like a sort of three-stage journey. Again, identifying your opportunities, scoping or strategically planning your opportunities, and then executing on those opportunities. So that last one would be the actual grant writing. And again, here at Pocketed, we've built software that can help with every stage of that journey. We also offer services that can help at every stage of that journey. So, depending on your capacity, your budget, your appetite for grants, we can have a human approach, we can have a technology approach. And I would say that at bare minimum, the short answer is yes. When folks sign up for a software subscription with Pocketed, we do ask that you make a year commitment. Happy to charge you monthly or annually, whatever you prefer. But it's an easy way to answer your question, Andrew. We do think that grants take time. People want them to be just like a money tap. I want them to be that, but like we're already chatting about, they do require some forward thinking, and you can see a return sometimes in as little as 6 to 8 weeks. If you apply for a wage subsidy and you get it quickly, and you have the person ready to start, and they're going to issue your reimbursement. But for the most part, we're going to see things like for that market expansion grant, 60 days to get approved, and then at least another 30 days to see your first reimbursement. You also have to line up your ability to write the grant with the application, the program rather actually being open. So timing definitely is important. I would say checking in to your Pocketed account, so your customized grant list, at least once a quarter, once a month. But I think that's again, we offer something called Pocketed Concierge. So you get all of our software features, but you also get essentially a fractional grant strategist. Folks like me or other members of our executive team or some really seasoned grant writers. And with that offering, we commit to doing deep a strategic deep dive twice a year with like some short check-ins in between. So I would say, you definitely want to be planning out your opportunities in advance and then checking in on those few that maybe you're trying to keep an eye on.
Well, in my own experience being with the wage subsidy, it was someone who was hired who began in May and worked through to the end of August. And it was, a few months after that the subsidy came. So when you talk about I use the market expansion one as an example, you could be approved in 60 days and you might qualify for a subsidy 30 days later. But that subsidy is also predicated on what did you spend. And if your market expansion, if your expenditure is sort of spread out over a longer period of time, from a managing cash flow and so on, in some ways, you almost have to say, I have to operate as if the money is never coming, and I don't mean that in a denigrating way, so that because you cannot plan for when the subsidy, because there's so many other factors at play. The subsidy will come, as you said, the government will guarantee that it comes, but you can't say it's going to come by Tuesday, July, blah blah blah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, and again, I think the more that you do it and the more that you get familiar with certain funders, you can have some sense. And I actually come to Pocketed. I worked for a funder for many years and helped build four different hiring programs. And I'm really proud of that organization and the other delivery agents of those funds that we all kind of came up together. People, these are still humans like delivering these programs. And I'm really proud of how reliable those that have stuck around have become. They're great sources for adding folks to your team. They're reliable sources for adding money to your budget. But cash flow management is real. And that's why not just at Pocketed, but also, in the larger government funding system, it's not always just grants, right? It's tax incentives and it's debt. There's some really amazing government loan programs that are available. And there's also private loans that will help you bridge that gap, right? Between knowing that you're going to get the money, having that signed funding contract from a funder, but then the 60 or 90 or 120 days that it takes to get it. There are lenders that they specifically lend against the value of a forthcoming grant. So often,
And do you work in that space as helping facilitate getting, I'll call it the government, being the government, or getting the government to be the guarantor?
yeah. So largely with Pocketed in our marketplace of different service providers, we absolutely just refer folks out to partners for private debt solutions. So it's very common, for example, in the shred space that's that large scale R&D tax credit. If you believe you're gonna get $200,000 from that program, but you're waiting for the check to land in your bank account, there are absolutely financiers that will lend against the forthcoming value of that. Private lenders. Um, Debt solutions against grants tend to be for larger value programs. And then I don't know if you guys can hear, my son is being loud over there. It's all good. Um, there are also Y we also see a lot of folks going after these high value government loans in tandem with doing maybe a larger fundraise, right? What a savvy entrepreneur you would be if you are taking some venture capital, but extending that same runway, and using the venture capital as the matching fund that might be required for a large scale government loan, and basically doubling the investment in your business. So debt can be really powerful at the right time. And absolutely, those are referrals and introductions that we can make at Pocketed. Again, I will say that largely people that are financing debt have healthy minimums, 50,000, $100,000 loans. It's hard to find a loan, for example, for a $7,000 student hiring grant, something that small.
No, that makes sense. And but to your point, it's about looking for programs that suit the stage that you're at. One, not to be too burdensome to you as an organization. Like, don't try to hit a home run and like go for a grant that would be a stretch for you. Like, find the easier money for the stage that you're at as an organization.
Well, and so many of these grants require matching contributions for that exact reason, right? The government is willing to make an investment in your business or your project, but they're not willing to take all the risk, right? They're not giving you 100% and they're not going to give it to you up front, but they'll give you 70% as long as you can float the other 30% to hire a student. And there are some exceptions to that. We are hoping to see youth funding flowing again later in 2023. These are great hiring programs across a range of industries. They give you 100% wage subsidy to hire people that are graduated from college or university but are younger than 30, so youth. Um, but again, it's 100%, but it's a reimbursement. So you might get a couple of payments, but you're at least going to have to make, I don't know, maybe 12 weeks of payroll without having the grant in your bank account.
Like I said earlier, it goes back to cash flow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it's also creative. It's interesting because I think with all of this, I actually have an acting degree and I was a filmmaker for a long time. Um, and then worked in a nonprofit and had my own business. And I've had a pretty circuitous career path, but through it all, I've always worked with entrepreneurs and I've always tried to creatively problem solve. And it's this same situation here at Pocketed. It's like, you want to do this project, there's this funding and maybe this funding and likely this funding, but how do we put it all together and, give you the fuel that you need for your liftoff? And so it's really rewarding, and it is feeds that part of our brains that I think, so many of us, you're a marketer, Andrew. It's creative, but it's also, business strategy, and getting to do both of those things or all of those things is a real privilege.
Well, coincidentally, I have a degree in film production. Uh, and one of my friends in film school approached us to manage the social for a streaming project. And we had to write what is referred to as a discovery plan. So essentially a social media strategy, wrote it, and that got them access to funding from the Bell Media Fund. Thank you. So to your point, it's like, okay, there might be, government grants for small business or business, but there's also tons of grants and funds available for the arts, but there's criteria for it. And yeah, so just a different area, but the
No,
same
absolutely.
application.
And Pocketed is really our, kind of core clientele, our business owners, but we also know lots of, artists have the commercial application of their work. So there are arts grants in our database, there are academic grants, there are nonprofit grants, because again, um, often, you might be doing one thing, but how do we just sort of like look at it slightly off angle and say, oh no, like that also absolutely is going to drive the intended outcome of a specific program. Let's go ahead and apply. So yeah, the Pocketed or rather funding. It's there's no shortage of programs. There's no shortage of industries that the government's happy to support. And we're here for all of it. We're excited to help folks access the money that's right for their projects at the right time.
Well, but my last question is, if there were one thing you would advise, a business or small business, with respect to pursuing funding and grants and so on, or also maybe some more broadly with what you've seen of the different kinds of businesses that you've interacted with, if you had one piece of advice, what would it be?
Probably just get started, um, and get started in advance. I think that, yeah, I think that uh, knowing that it's going to be a journey, but the only thing that's going to let you fail is if you don't start at all. So start learning about programs, start talking, to other entrepreneurs or a grant consultant. Here at Pocketed, we offer free office hours at least twice a week. So these are community Zoom sessions. Sometimes there's 2 folks, sometimes there's 10 folks. We do a ton of free webinars about both different funding programs or organizational readiness that you need to do to get ready for the programs. So really, it's like get started, and because the reason that I left my very stable, not startup job to come work for Pocketed is because I was working for close to 4 years with entrepreneurs who would use one of the funding programs that I'd helped build, and then they would be like, we want more. And I had this kind of funky spreadsheet of other funding programs that they could go to when my programs were closed. And then I actually met our co-founders. They leveraged the funding program that I was working on. And they were building this amazing software solution where instead of, literally going down rabbit holes and spending hours in Google, you could, with like a few clicks of a button, figure out which programs were open, which were relevant to your business. And at least that was a starting point, a very focused starting point for starting your research. So I think learning about your opportunities, and when possible, working with a strategist. And again, that can be in our free office hours. Bring your questions. Come to a focused webinar about a specific program. or book a one-off consultation with a grant strategist. You might not do everything on the list of suggestions for 2 years, but that can go by really fast. And then suddenly you can be like pocketed and say, wow, we've, hired dozens of people. All of them have been wage subsidized. Look at this growth.
Hmm. Well, it's kind of analogous to what VCs say, where raise money when you don't need it. And to your point, is like, so you should be familiar with some funding, maybe even start the process in anticipation to better to have been awarded it, and I won't say not need it, but maybe not need it as immediately as others might think. But the process takes the amount of time that it takes, so why
Yeah,
not set it in
yeah,
motion? So,
yeah, totally. And honestly, I mean, I'm really good at procrastination, and so I get
really.
it. But at the end of the day, things like student wage subsidies, like particularly, they're, yeah, I'll keep with that example. Particularly student wage subsidies, they are available 3 times a year. The actual, the paperwork is not that onerous. There's a really easy solution with Pocketed if you want to outsource the paperwork. And next thing you know, you suddenly have a new, very savvy intern on your team helping you get things done. And oh, wow, suddenly there's a direct deposit for $7,000 in your bank account. So we know that I'm sure that being a business owner is a lot like being a new parent. It's like those, like, what do they say? Like the shortest, longest time, where it's like taking so long to see the growth you want to see, but these days are so short, and before you know it, a whole quarter's gone by, a whole fiscal's gone by. And wouldn't it have been nice if you were getting some grant money during that time? So it is possible.
Yeah, there's a great expression I heard recently: we have to go slow to go fast.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for your time and for all of the insights and advice that you shared. I'm grateful for it, and I'm sure those that watch this or listen to it will be equally grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.